Zach, I think one of my favorite parts about our conversations is that we are covering a couple of different generations on this podcast. I am a bit older than you and have a bit of a different perspective on some things, and I love that. I love the fact that I'm bringing one perspective and you're bringing something very different to the conversation, and that leads us to what we wanted to talk about today, which is the buying habits of consumers in all of these different generations.
I love it, Gabe. You mentioned we have a couple different generations on this podcast, and we do, believe it or not. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But I did want to talk about what these generations are. Everything from the boomer demographic all the way down to Gen Z. So for those who may not be familiar, the boomer age group, that is everyone from about 56 to 75. Then you have your Gen X, 41 to 55. Your millennials, 26 to 40, and then you have, of course, Gen Z, 18 to 25. And then below Gen Z, you even have Gen Y now, who will be, what did we say, Gabe? They'll be about 15 years old here this year, or?
Yeah, right around there, and they'll be our consumers that we're talking about here in the next few years for sure. But it's interesting. You hear these numbers kind of thrown around, the age groups and the when people were born to fall into these different generations. And I think both you and I, Zach, are kind of at the edge of generations, right? So I'm 43, which would put me, smack dab in the Gen X group. But I have heard some folks say 1980 would be considered millennial, which I was born in 80, so that would kind of throw me into the millennial group. So I'm kind of right on that edge, and I think you're kind of the same on the other. I would be older millennial, you would be younger millennial or Gen Z, yes?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I feel like we've seen a lot of different age groups or, date ranges for these groups as well. For Gen Z specifically, the one I see thrown around quite often, and Wikipedia says 1996, so we'll go with that as well. But that 1996
got to be fact then, right?
Yeah, it has to be. I think 1996 to about 2010 or so is when that Gen Y cutoff was. So definitely we have some different generations. Gabe, we have worked together for almost 3 years now, if you can believe it. And wow. I think, just I don't want to say so much the way we talk or the ideas we have, but there's definitely some generational differences between some of the initiatives we work on and how we communicate. So not only that, but we've never talked about this, but I know for a fact we have different buying habits, different consumer habits, and that's exactly what we want to talk about today. The rise of the Gen Z consumer.
Indeed. Yeah, no, it's exactly right. We definitely want to talk through how different generations approach purchasing goods, services, whatever, and some research that Zach and I found around this specific topic. We found a research paper around this whole topic of generations and how they purchase. This research paper was based off of a survey of around 2,000 consumers in the United States. There's an international survey that they did as well, but we're focusing on some of the U.S. stuff since that's generally where the most folks who are listening to this are consuming the content. So lots of interesting stuff that jumped out of that study, and so many things from a marketing perspective that I think we can learn around how it is that we should be engaging with these consumers from these different generation buckets or brackets, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason we want to talk about this today is Gen Z is buying products and services now, right? They have been for a few years. I mentioned Gen Y, and I'm not going to jump into Gen Y too much today, but they will be the next to buy your products and services too. So staying ahead of these age groups is very important. And one of the things we talked about just last week, Gabe, was social media ads, specifically with Meta, Facebook, Instagram. That's really where we focused our time. And there was a statistic that came out, and it said that 58% of Gen Z consumers have bought something from a social media post in the last 12 months. And I had to go back and think of what's the last thing I bought from a social media post? But Gabe, I want to flip it over to you here. When you see a social media ad or a social media post, what does your engagement with that look like?
Not a lot. I probably fall a little bit more squarely into the Gen X group with this, where I'm, a bit more reticent to actually purchase something from from a social media ad. I will say, what usually ends up happening is I see the same, you end up seeing the same ads kind of over and over and over again, right? And then if I am going to purchase something from that, I go off and I do my own research of like, all right, let me actually go to the company's website. Let me look at the, whatever it is that they're trying to sell. Maybe let me read some reviews, those sorts of things. So I tend to fall more into that camp of, okay, I've seen it on social. I'm not necessarily going to click on that ad, but I'm going to go out and actually do some research on the company and figure out, is this something that I actually think is going to be a good solution for me for whatever problem I'm trying to solve? Where are you at on that spectrum, Zach?
I just have to say, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but as you go and do your research, we both know exactly what's happening. There is said companies gathering more data about where you're at on their website or where you're at in the purchase flow, and then using that against you as well. So I think that's just hilarious. We'll talk about some of the ways you can use this data and how that's perceived in a few minutes. I'm trying to think of like the last social ads, and I'm guilty of something that this study also said that Gen Z is guilty of, and that is using an ad blocker, some kind of ad blocking solution. And I know we'll talk about kind of the why and the experience behind that as well. But as a marketer, and even when I'm talking to different marketers and my friends who also work in marketing, everyone seems to be using some kind of ad blocking solution. And I think this survey said between 40 and 50% of Gen Z's using an ad blocker. Just last week, my sister was talking about it, and we got it all set up with an ad blocker too. But that really translates back to the customer experience. And that's what we'll talk about in a few minutes is, are the ads so intrusive that we need to block them, or how do we, market when people are blocking ads? So we'll talk about that more in depth, but I really can't tell you, Gabe, with the last social ad I saw where I bought something. But I am like you. If I see a social ad, I'll click into it and I'll research the product. The last social ads I've been seeing quite often come from Tesla, of all places. I have not bought one. I don't intend to. I've got different options here, but that's the one I've seen most. And I like to stay up to date on all the Tesla news and just tech news in general. So when I see something like that, I'm interested, but that's not a product I'm necessarily buying. However, that's the social ad. So let's talk a little about email. Gabe, 41% of Gen Z consumers have made a purchase from an email in the last 12 months. And millennials, Gen X, and boomers are actually 49% more likely to buy a product or a service from an email than Gen Z. So significant difference there. How about email for you? Do you shop from emails much or clicking into different products and services?
Yeah, I'm much more likely to buy from an email than I am from a social ad. So again, this is an area where I'm I think pretty typical for the generation that I fall into, because they're companies that I've done business with before. And we'll get into this a little bit as well, but this is where personalization really matters, and personalizing the community. Because I have done business with those companies before, they can leverage that information and data about what it is that I like and don't like and what might interest me to personalize that communication. And the ones that I do business with the most are the ones who have good personalization and show me content that is actually relevant to something that I would want to purchase. So I'm much more likely to buy from an email of a business company that I've done business with before versus a rando social ad that I see scrolling through Twitter or something like that.
I do have a follow-up question for you, Gabe. If you received a advertisement through an email or a social ad, as far as trustworthiness goes, let's say this is a company you maybe have not interacted with in the past, would you be more likely to trust the email or trust the social ad that you've seen?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it probably depends a little bit on, what kind of depends on what it is that they're selling and how the ad actually looks, right? If somebody's been able to cram social proof into the ad, then maybe I would trust the ad more. I probably would trust the social ad more than an email, because I end up getting spammed with so much crap in my email, and I'm sure you do too, that unless it's a company that you've done business with before, if I don't know who the company is, it's just an immediate delete from my email if it's not getting caught up in some junk filter already, right? So that would be, I would tend to say probably more social ad than email, just because of how much garbage comes into your email.
I agree. I'll be honest. I don't like email that much. So if you target me through an email, that will most likely get deleted unless it's something, again, that's personalized with me or in some way resonates with me. And Gabe, in the past, we did an entire podcast episode on what does the internet know about me, where we looked at the different data points that can be collected and how you can use that to personalize the customer experience or that marketing message. And I think that's vital. I mean, everything we both just said, you mentioned you want to see content that's personalized to you. That's the best way to avoid going into that junk or that trash can within the email. Mm-hmm. The last channel I want to talk about, though, is text messaging. And I feel like this is an interesting one because I thought about this. And so 32% have made a purchase from a text message in the last 12 months. That's 32% of Gen Z. I've thought about this. I do not get any, if at all, very few marketing text messages. I honestly can't think of one off the top of my head that I've gotten. How about you, Gabe?
I've gotten a few, and it's been, again, through companies that I've done business with. So you're going through and you purchase something, and then you end up getting on the list, and then they start texting you about stuff. And I was really surprised by the 32. I mean, that's basically a third of people have made a purchase from a text message. That's a big number. I was surprised by that figure. Even though I'm on some text message threads, with companies that I've done business with before, I can't say that I've actually made a purchase. I will say, Zach, I meant to tell you this earlier this week. So I bought some new Apple AirPods this week, and the communication from Apple actually came in through an iMessage, which I thought was really interesting. So when I placed the order, I did it I purchased it via Apple Pay. And then I got an immediate text message that said, or an iMessage that said, hey, this order is placed, you're going to get it in a couple of days or whatever. And then when it shipped, I got another notification. And when it got delivered, I got another notification. So I'm curious to see if Apple now is going to start advertising to me via text, because that's one where I probably would fall into the trap of buying something if it was Apple versus some other rando company.
Any Apple ad, I'm all into, right? I like to stay up on the Apple news. Gabe, I think you and I are both pretty deep into the Apple ecosystem, but it's actually fun that we talk about Apple and SMS. I've gotten the same updates. When you buy a new iPhone, new Mac, you get the little text messages that say, hey, it's shipped, it's ready, so on from there. You even get emails talking about how to set up your product. They know everything, right? It's just a great customer experience, which is a great transition into what I want to talk about next, is some of the things that Gen Z wants and then some of the things that Gen Z doesn't want. So as we go through these, you can really start to think of how does this differ from how I would market to a boomer, how I would market to a millennial. But number one thing Gen Z wants is a consistent user experience. Gabe, what do you think about that?
Well, to go back to your comment, I think Apple has, kind of ruined a whole generation on this, because people are used to that consistent user experience with, Apple products, whether it's an iPhone or a watch or AirPods or whatever, iPad, all of that, having that consistency of experience across. I think that really has filtered down into other parts of our consumer experience also. And yeah, it's really becoming almost table stakes now, where people expect that consistent experience across every single thing that they're purchasing from you. I don't think that's a bad thing either, Zach. I mean, I feel like that is a somewhat reasonable expectation for consumers of companies.
It's funny because as we talk about this, it's exactly that. I would think, why would you not strive to have, the best user experience you can with your customers? So I absolutely agree with you there. The second one here was a loyalty program. And I have two examples that Gabe, I know you will love one of these, if not both, because this is something I don't think we have gone a week without talking in the past 3 years of knowing each other at this point. But loyalty programs, Gen Z loves loyalty programs. They love the unexpected rewards that come with them. That random email that says, hey, it could be like, I often get the ones that say, hey, like, did you forget about us? Here's a 10% discount, or here's 100 points for your next visit. The two that come to mind, and I'm going to start with Crumbl, because if you're not familiar with Crumbl, it's the cookie. It's really just a cookie shop, I think, and they have what's called crumbs, and it's their loyalty. You go, you buy cookies, you get crumbs, and you can then redeem those crumbs for actual cookies. I love that loyalty program. I don't know how many free cookies I've gotten from it. I'm afraid to share that number. I could check the app. But they're one that every now and then they will send out an update being like, hey, did you miss us this week? Or did you see what's on the menu? Great user experience, great loyalty program. They're coming to me with an unexpected offer too. The other one I think of, and I should mention too that both of these I'm thinking of how great the mobile app is as well, just as a side note. The other one I'm thinking of is Chipotle. Okay, we have always talked about Chipotle and Qdoba, and which may or may not be for dinner tonight. But they've got the same thing built into their app. You go to their shop, you spend money, you buy tacos, burritos, so on, and you get points back that you can then redeem. And Chipotle does the same thing. You may get that unexpected email occasionally reminding you of the loyalty program. Maybe you have some free food pending. But I think the Gen Z in me loves loyalty programs, and it keeps me coming back, right? I need to get more crumbs. I need to buy more cookies so I can get the next free one. That's totally how I see the loyalty program.
See, the old guy version of this is the card where you would go in and they'd make a little stamp on it, or punch a hole in it, and then you would buy 10 sandwiches and get one free. I totally had that experience.
Punch your own hole? Isn't that an instant free sandwich?
I mean, it wasn't a perfect system, and there was no marketing that went along with it. But that was the version of that when I was your age. The one that comes to mind for me is Starbucks. So I totally agree with you on the others as well. I think those are great examples. But Starbucks one. So I finally relented on the Starbucks app, and I'm not a huge fan of Starbucks. As people who know me know that I'm very pretentious about my coffee. I'm actually fairly pretentious about most food related things, but especially my coffee. And I don't think Starbucks is very good. But when I'm on the road and I'm traveling for work, oftentimes Starbucks is the only or best option that I have. So, and especially when you're in the airport, it's literally the only option. So I was in an airport this was, a month or two ago. And the line for Starbucks was just stupid. It was first thing in the morning. Everybody's going to try and get their coffee, and the line is just ridiculous. So they had the little mobile order pickup section. And if you download the app, you can just do the mobile order. And then it was way faster. And I really needed coffee, real bad. So finally relented and downloaded the app and got my coffee and got it way faster than I would have if I had stood in the ridiculously long line. And now it's been really interesting because now I have push notifications turned on from Starbucks, right? And I've been curious to kind of just watch this. And it's been really interesting seeing how they look to bring you back in with those rewards, with that with their loyalty program to try and get you to, come back and, like you said, buy more, right? But it's very clever, and they've really done a good job of gamifying it in a super, super clever way. And pretty impressed with that whole app and that program.
Yeah, well, there goes our Starbucks sponsorship. But I think, two things there. The consistent user experience, you've got the loyalty program. And the last point I want to make here, which may tie into your Starbucks example, is Gen Z wants data that makes them feel comfortable and special. So that VIP, I'm a very important person when I'm using this product or service. Gabe, it sounds like being able to skip the line. I mean, it kind of feels VIP status, doesn't it?
Definitely felt VIP. I felt super special just rolling up and grabbing my cappuccino to go. The other thing with Starbucks is, people order all of the insane drinks, right? It's the, tall cappuccino, half calf, extra hot, blah, 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 right? People have all the crazy stuff. The super nice part about the app is whatever ridiculous order you make, it's going to be in your recent orders. So you can just quickly go through and do that without having to feel the shame of having to say your ridiculously long order at Starbucks. So there's, I think, a component of that too that makes you feel special, because when you go into the app, it remembers what it was that you ordered. And so you have that consistent experience also.
I'm going to add one last app. So we talked about Crumble. We talked about Chipotle. How could we not talk about McDonald's? McDonald's, and I'm not like a big McDonald's fan, but they have probably one of the best apps that I have ever seen in like the food service industry. And I say that because it's the same thing as Starbucks. You can view their menu, you can buy food, you can select a pickup spot, you can go in and you can pick it up, you can go through the drive-through, give them the code. It's seamless. But there's also a feature where you can add like your most popular order into Siri. So you can simply say like, hey Siri, like place my McDonald's order, and
Ooh, that's pretty
does
clever.
it all. It's again, that user experience is fantastic. I haven't personally used the Siri button. I've seen it and I've played with it, but I mean I just don't go to McDonald's enough to do that. Or usually if I do, it's just so random, so I don't have like a specific order to do. But I feel like with everything we've talked about so far about what Gen Z wants, everything ties back to an app. And one thing about Gen Z is we love our apps. We've grown up with mobile phones, iPhones. If I go out, I'm paying with Apple Pay. I'm paying with the app itself. Whether it's McDonald's in this case or Starbucks, Crumble. You can pay with the app. So I am like very much looking forward to the day where the iPhone or Android totally replaces my wallet. We're very close. I don't have the digital driver's license yet, although I think a few states do. So we're getting closer to that. But this whole user experience, customer experience is very vital, and really everything we just talked, it all connects. So
well, and that mobile piece, just to top up that part one really quick, Zach, is I think that ties back to the being willing to purchase via text message too. It's almost like the app stuff is the gateway drug for text message purchases, where you start to get comfortable with using your phone to make these purchases via an app. And then it comes via text message and it's like, all right, well, this is kind of a lateral move. It's not that big a deal. I'm still blown away by that 1/3 of people making a purchase through a text message in the last 12 months. That just seems like a crazy high number.
That one's wild to me, and I'm obviously in the the 70% or the 68% that hasn't. But tonight I'm gonna get a text message, and I'll let you know, Gabe, as soon as I get it. But now I'm gonna be targeted by a text message. So what does Gen Z not want? And this is very important too, because number one here, messages that fail to address their wants and needs, or a message that's irrelevant. Gabe, at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about personalization and just this, making sure the offer is relevant. We talked about email specifically and how some of these emails go right into the trash can if it's irrelevant. I sent you a email I got this week, and it was from UberJets. That was an email I was targeted with. And while I think it would be fun to fly around on a private jet, that's not a relevant offer. I'm not really looking to do that right now, unless someone else is paying for it. Then I'm not opposed. But as funny as that email was, it wasn't relevant. It did not. I mean, it addressed a want, I guess, but it did not address a need. So that's kind of my weekly example. What about you? Anything that you've seen that fails to address your needs or wants?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's the irrelevance of the offers that I think irritates people, and it's not just, in this case, it's not just Gen Z that has a real problem with irrelevant offers or offers that are not personalized. That's something that when we looked at the research, it was consistent across the generations. People want to have messages that are personalized to them. And there's tons of studies out there that talk about this. I have a coworker who talks about one from McKinsey a lot, and it's another great one that talks about 70% of people, want personalization, and that an even higher percentage of people are disappointed when they don't get it. There needs to be those relevant offers, and I think some of the better examples that I've seen of this, and I've talked about this before, but are the food delivery apps. I have Grubhub on my phone. I have DoorDash on my phone. Grubhub does a really good job of personalizing the message that they're sending out when they send out app notifications. And DoorDash does not. DoorDash is much more a just spray and pray, 10% off your next order. It's very promotional driven, versus Grubhub is very thoughtful about the big game is going to be on tomorrow, and get your order in now, right? That type of thing. So it's they are just much more thoughtful about how they're personalizing that message to the people who have the app on their phone, and it really comes through in the experience that you have with them versus the other.
Gabe, that's a great transition into another item that Gen Z does not want, and that's communications delivered at the wrong time of the day. We've talked about Uber Eats, Grubhub in the past. I think you were the one that had mentioned, was it a mattress ad or something you got that was very well timed? And I feel like the examples you gave are fantastic too, but I absolutely hate waking up in the morning and I've got 20 notifications, because the unfortunate reality is I just close all, and if it's a text message, I'll get to it eventually. But if your notification was in that stack, it's gone. So again, having those communications at the right time of the day is very important.
And that's one that I've seen Grubhub be really thoughtful about is, and Starbucks actually does a pretty good job of this too, from the notifications that I've seen from them. They'll do it's the mid-afternoon pick-me-up, or whatever, where they're kind of leaning into, the time of day that it is, and, maybe you're lagging a little bit and you want to go get yourself a treat, right? They're timing it around when it's going to be relevant for that person. Like I said, the food delivery apps, I think Grubhub does a really good job of this. They'll send it in the afternoon when you're probably thinking, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? And it's not a decision that you want to make. And then all of a sudden this notification pops up. It's like, oh, sweet. Well, let's just order from Grubhub tonight. Done and done.
It's funny. I just picked up my phone because I was curious. It's in Do Not Disturb right now, but I swiped up to see what notifications I've had in the last 20 minutes now of doing this podcast. And I've been looking at different networking equipment on Amazon lately. And sure enough, it says, we think you'll like this deal. And it's a specific piece of equipment here, 10% off. That's exactly, it goes back to the data is based off my previous searches. Amazon knows what I'm shopping for, and there's my deal. So what better timing than that? And that's the last item I wanted to talk about, which is what Gen Z does not want. And this is messages that don't recognize your shopping history and your loyalty history. So I just mentioned my Amazon was based off my shopping history. Gabe, you talked a little bit about Starbucks today. Do you think those notifications are based off your history with Starbucks?
That one I don't think is, just because I don't have enough history in the app for them to probably guide that decision yet. Eventually, probably they would be, because I have a feeling they're sophisticated enough to leverage all of that. But I haven't seen that personalization yet. But I think that's more just a function of they don't have enough information and data about me yet to really figure out what it is that they need to push to me. So how I engage is then going to drive what it is that they do in the future.
I love it. And one of my favorite parts, now we've talked a lot about personalization. I honestly can't imagine running an email campaign or a marketing campaign without doing personalization today. Like, it just seems like such a basic thing everyone should be doing. But creepy and cool. I feel like 10 years ago, a lot of what we're talking about, especially with that podcast episode we did, Gabe, What Does the Internet Know About Me? I feel like a lot of this might fall into that creepy category. But however, 79% of Gen Z consumers have stated that recommendations from past purchases are cool. But on the flip side of that coin, 61% said ads from unknown companies based on data is creepy. So there's this very fine line between how you use your data appropriately and being the new kid on the block trying to market to people who don't know who you are. And it's a dangerous line to cross, but again, it goes back to best leveraging the data you have on your consumers. And we did a whole podcast episode on like the Meta Pixel at one point, I think, where we talked about how this snippet of code can track people across your website. At the beginning of this episode, Gabe, we talked a little bit about that as well. And it's just used to, build more relevant communications and marketing messages to your prospects and to your customers. So I do think using data is important, but again, there's that fine line between what's beneficial and what can come off as creepy.
Yeah, there is definitely that balance between creepy and cool, and leaning into how people have engaged with your company already is obviously that's what people are expecting. If I buy a piece of clothing and from a company, and the stuff that they send me the next time is a whole bunch of stuff that is completely irrelevant to what I purchased before, that's going to be frustrating, because then you're having to search through a whole bunch of stuff to find something that maybe you want to purchase again or something similar. That type of stuff just seems very basic, that it's an expectation of consumers across the board, and especially Gen Z consumers, that you're going to leverage information in that way. I did think the location one was interesting, because that does seem to be more of a hot topic for younger generations who have grown up with a smartphone, and kind of understand that they're walking around with this thing all the time that is basically tracking everywhere they go. And it is interesting that particular generation is less okay with location tracking than perhaps a older generation who's just less aware. I wonder if it is just an awareness thing, Zach.
It's actually funny because I remember we talk about it all the time here in our Teams chats, but the Google timeline where it shows every business you've been to, if you drove, if you flew, it shows all that data, which, believe it or not, can be used for marketing. So keep that in mind. But it's kind of odd. And one of the things we looked at too was, what data are people comfortable sharing? And the ones that I think the respondents, I think it was more than 50% responded, I'd be comfortable sharing with this, was their hobbies and their interest, their email address, their name, date of birth, their income, which I thought was kind of odd, but I have noticed, like, specifically with Gen Z, it just feels like everyone's more open talking about those kinds of things. And then cell phone number, 50% plus all said they would be comfortable sharing this. However, though, the ones that were not as comfortable sharing, these ones were about 30%. Home address, your location from your phone, which I believe Apple's gotten very good at. When an app asks to track you or use your location, you get that prompt now. So that one's that's one. Your family makeup, and then your actual photograph too. So you think of like registering for a website, how much information am I giving them? How much am I comfortable giving them? The photograph one was odd because even like on social media, I'm like, I think of like Instagram. I think my Instagram account is private, but I'm like, man, if that was public, anyone could just go on and grab that image. So it's not something I'd like to share, but it's information that's out there for sure.
I think it's kind of ironic because what was it, about a year ago, where everybody was going through and making these AI versions of themselves and just uploading tons and tons of pictures of themselves into these AI engines. You go, you're not comfortable sharing your photo, but you're willing to just throw this out into your entire face into some random app so you can get AI generation. But okay, sure, yeah, let's pretend like we're privacy concerned.
I've seen those apps where it's like upload 10 photos, and I'm like, well, man, where are those photos going? And that's like, I don't understand this part of AI, but there's dozens of apps that do this. I've played with a few myself, not to the extent where I'm uploading photos, but I've seen the prompt. So I've always thought that was fascinating.
That one I don't get. I think it is amusing to me how people will see this new technology and completely forget all of the conversations that they've had previously about data privacy issues. Be like, yeah, cool, I can get a image of me looking like a Viking. Sweet, I should definitely upload my picture and figure this out.
Yeah, make that your Facebook photo too. But the last thing, Gabe, I want to talk about is customer experience, and I'm going to tie this back to with the ad blocking comment I made at the beginning of the podcast. The same study told us that 1/3 of consumers have switched away from a brand they previously favored in the last year due to a drop of quality, irrelevant offers, my favorite, a bad mobile app or bad website experience, and data privacy policies as well. Gabe, kind of looking back, I'm looking at brands I used to interact with. I can think of one that I already mentioned today that I've had a bad experience with that I've shied away from. And that's actually the example I'll use. I will use this one. I was looking for a new car, and I was looking at Tesla. I've always wanted one, and I was super excited. So I went and I test drove one, and the experience just wasn't great. The quality was much different from when I initially test drove one 3 years ago, and combined with other items as well, I left Tesla that day totally checked out. I was not going to buy one, and it pushed me to a competitor of Tesla's just because of this experience, this drop of quality. The irrelevant offer is one too. If you go and test drive a specific vehicle, you would, especially when you're signing up online, you'd expect that the ads you get following said test drive would be for the said vehicle, and that weirdly wasn't the case. So that's an example I've had lately where this brand I had previously favored was put in the back seat overnight just from this one bad experience.
It's interesting. I'm trying to think about a brand that I've moved away from recently, and perhaps why. I think for me it probably comes down more to like quality issues and things like that, versus some of the other like data privacy policies. I just sort of assume from a data perspective that unfortunately all my stuff is out there now and there's not a whole lot I can do about it. But it's, I'm not trying to be cynical about it, but it is probably just the reality. But I did think that the additional part of this, of which generation switched brands, was shocking. There was a lot more loyalty to me, or there's a lot more loyalty in the boomer group specifically than in some of the others. In the Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, the percentage of people switching was all about the same. It was all right around that third number. The percentage of people switching in the boomer generation was only 7%.
Significantly
so I guess
less, yeah.
Significantly less. So it does speak to the fact that if you can build loyalty with somebody over a long period of time, the likelihood of them leaving decreases dramatically. But in order to do it, you have to do all of the things that Zach and I talked about today, about relevant offers, making sure that you're leveraging data in a meaningful way, making sure you're leveraging data in a responsible way, making sure that you're communicating to them at the time that they want to be communicated with and through the channels that they want to be communicated with. I think that's really one of the biggest takeaways for me from reading this report, Zach, was it's not just about it's not just about personalization. That I think that's pretty obvious. And again, table stakes at this point. It's about how do I want to communicate with each one of these folks. One of the things that jumped out to me reading it as well was the lack of people that had engaged with banner ads, especially in the younger generations. Banner ads, it seems like, are just effectively dead from a marketing perspective. And we were sort of joking about this earlier this week, Zach, on when you go to run a speed test and the insane amount of banner ads that you see on some of those websites. But it speaks to the fact of ad blockers. I think you talked about that earlier too, right? Where people are blocking ads just in general, but that most people are not going to click on banner ads and purchase anything anymore. That percentage of people who are doing that continues to decrease. I think the number was I want to say it was down 40% year over year in the study that we looked at. It's just not an area that you want to be spending money anymore.
I agree, and the reason I use AdBlock is because of banner ads. I don't want these windows all over my screen. There's sites I do whitelist on AdBlock. I think Facebook is ironically whitelisted, but I never check Facebook on the desktop. I have the app for that, right? So when I come across a social ad, it's much more meaningful than this banner ad. I absolutely hate banner ads. They do have their place, but it's not, to your point, it's not the most effective tool in today's online life.
Well, especially for marketing to the younger generations, right? That's just they're much less likely to engage with that type of content. So your dollars would be much better spent in other places on social. Trying to figure out how to get opt-ins for text messages apparently is the thing that we're all going to be trying to figure out.
Like I mentioned, if you're living on your phone, optimize your marketing strategy. In this case, for Gen Z, knowing that they'll be on their phones all the time. So. That was like the old man in me, like they'll be on their phones all the time, but it's true. This is the connected generation. I'm excited, Gabe. In a few years, we will have to do a follow-up episode on Gen Y and talk about what has changed from this episode until then.
Well, I'm excited because at that point, you'll be the old man who will be crotchety about Gen Y versus me being crotchety about Gen Z. So that'll be fun.
Oh, definitely. Well, I mean, I'm already like, it's almost summertime. I just made a comment to a colleague today that in a few weeks I'll be getting the lawnmower out and competing with the neighborhood dad. So that's always exciting. But I'm excited, Gabe. We'll keep the show around for a few years and get that next generation. But that's all the time we have today. So thank you for joining us on this episode. Don't forget to give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. And keep in mind, if you'd like to see Gabe's face more often, not mine, I just throw Gabe under the bus there, you can follow us on Spotify and YouTube for video as well. So we'll be back next week with a new episode, and we'll see you then.